think the guy's name is Andrew Holochek, but worth a listen.
The other period, they always advise you to do it while you're falling asleep, but some people fall asleep pretty quickly, so that doesn't work so easily. Other times, people can sort of gently fall asleep, and you go into the hypnagogic states, and there's, that's sort of interesting to watch. But the other time, and the one that I found the best for lucid dreaming practice was in the morning. You sort of first wake up, but then you go back to sleep, and you're sort of you have that ability to dream, but you can actually direct it. So you can direct it to any purpose you want, but you can practice with that, and you can actually create sort of dreams. And then that has interesting possibilities too.
Yeah, they also suggested, now I don't do much napping, but they said napping's also a great time to do it because you don't really go into a very deep sleep. So you're kind of in and out of, sort of that transition period between sleeping and dreaming. You're in that state longer in napping. So they said that's a pretty good time to try it as well. I wish I could nap, but alas, no time.
Make me sleepy just talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
The napping is generally not so good for dreaming, but it can be good for more of I wouldn't call it quite clear light practice, but it's moving in that direction where you go into kind of a daze where you're lying in your bed, you're on your back, your eyes are closed, you're very still, and bit by bit the external world falls away, and until there's only sort of this sensation of sort of nothing. And so you can do that when you're napping. That's kind of nice. Take all your thoughts down one by one and just kind of go into a sort of an empty state. We had a seminar by Shri Das on dream yoga. Joe and Don, you went to that, didn't you?
Yep. Yeah, I remember. Still try to
sleep on your right side.
Yeah.
So you just put your hand up by your ear, thing, there's a spot there, I guess, where induces the dreaming or something. I
always woke up extremely exhausted after the night when I tried it. He also said, prop yourself up or something. It really was not sleeping so much. I had good, we had a couple of retreats at your house, Bruce, and I had one of the ones when we would wake up in the middle of the night and go outside to the Zindo. I had some pretty memorable dreams of that. In those cases.
Yeah, back when we were younger, we tried the things where we were falling asleep and waking up and falling asleep and waking up and different things. The all-night practices were fun, definitely. Well, we are talking about Trungpa Rinpoche, his book, The Glimpses of Abhidharma, where he talked about his introduction. He discusses Abhidharma. We talked about the first Skandha form. in his rift on that. And so now we're at this next chapter. We're going to go through the 5 skandhas. That's his teaching on Abhidharma at this seminar that he did in 1975. And it's very interesting because it's fairly early in his teaching career. And so a lot of the themes that he's going to later develop and come out at different points. We also talked about last time how he's created a sort of a cosmology of human psychological development, which is his kind of interesting, creative take on Abhidharma, in that he talks about how, as individuals, we're arising out of a kind of bewilderment, that the primordial world in all its splendor was too dazzling, and we became bewildered and blanked out or fainted. And then we woke up, we were, and we saw ourselves as a separate individual, and the world is apart from us. And that is the basic ignorance. We're ignorant of our oneness with that primordial splendor. Now we see ourselves as just sort of a detached individual in a world that we're not even sure is benevolent. So that bewilderment is the ignorance that underlies that first skandha, which is the skandha of form. The material world is a kind of hallucination, really, of resulting from this bewilderment, that everything is seen through this self-other filter. So it's always us and the world, us and other people, us and our ideas, us and our feelings, us and so that kind of split and everything being sort of separate and autonomous is the basic confusion that comes with form. So tonight he's going to talk about feeling and how that fits into this kind of, again, evolutionary human psychology that he's developing. So he says, we should perhaps go on to the next stage, the second skandha, feeling. Feeling consists of the pleasurable and the painful. In the usual psychology of people, pleasurable experiences are related to as positive and creative, and painful experiences are related to as negative and destructive. The development of relating to things in terms of positive or negative value is an extension of the basic pattern of ego established by form, the first skandha. Something to hold on to, our sense of self. We go a little beyond that to try and identify that form, the outer world, as friendly or enemy, hostile or welcoming. This has the effect of solidifying whatever it is even further as something that defines ego's position by implication. Remember, we talked about this loop that we create where we project the outside world, and then that outside world then reinforces us, and then we reinforce the outside world, which further reinforces us, and we create a loop that creates our whole narrative of self and other and its long history and so forth. Form provides a background which is composed of rudimentary names and concepts: positivity, good feeling, godliness, cleanliness, beauty, power, and so on the one hand, and the negative, painful, evil, dirty, destructive, and so on the other hand. The first, the positive, is connected with birth, the second, the negative, with death. These dualistic criteria and others, such as hot and cold, are the starting point for feeling. Feeling is this, in the sense of the second skandha, cannot function independently of them. So feeling, in other words, can't function independently of our general dualistic take on everything. Feeling in this sense is something much more fundamental than just pure sensation. We're not just bombarded with sensations of different kinds, that we actually have some kind of overlay that we're putting on those sensations. So he says, all kinds of concepts develop on the basis of feelings, basic dualism. Fundamentally is the nature of positive and negative, but feeling also has the third possibility of indifference. So here actually he's stumbles on introduces one of the basic Abhidharma categories that everything is related to in terms of wanting it, rejecting it, or being indifferent to it. So we have desire, hatred, and indifference, the three poisons. So the three poisons are contaminating this whole process of feeling. And our feeling is, in fact, related to either desire, aversion, or indifference. From the Abhidharma point of view. The positivity and negativity of feeling is elaborated in terms of mind-body situation. Feeling solidifies itself in terms of these two fields of experience. Feeling relates to the mind as emotions and a body as clusters of instincts, things, and thingness. Understanding of the mind-body pattern of feeling is very important in connection with meditation. We can meditate either intellectually or intuitively. Meditation on the intellectual level is involved with the mind side of body. It is very imaginary. Intuitive meditation engages the body level of feeling, particularly body sensations, pleasurable sensations, pain in the legs, hot and cold temperatures in the room, and so on. Mind is the emotional, imaginary, or dream quality, and body in this case is also a quality of mind. That is, we do not, in feeling, experience body as it is. We experience our version of body. The fundamental point of view of ego, based on comparative criteria, the definite separation between this and that, is already operational at this point. The basic twist is already there with the first skandha form. The unobstructed space of things as they are is already distorted by the time we get to feeling. We cannot help anyway working along with this situation as naive people confronted by what has happened already. Still, looked at from a very basic point of view, the whole involvement of feeling is very childish. In fact, when we really see it, we see it as fundamentally deceptive. When we talk about feeling, we usually think in terms of feeling towards someone else. You fall in love with someone, you are angry with someone. In that imagery, the other person is all important and you are insignificant. On the other hand, you feel slighted or you want to be loved. In that case, you are all important and the others are insignificant. Feeling plays that introvert-extrovert game of making itself important by reflecting off the other. But in reality, all that is very remote. Nobody's actually involved but yourself. You are alone, are creating the whole game by yourself. So understanding feeling is very revealing about how you relate with things. Feeling involves the pretense that you are involved with somebody, but actually you are just beating your own head against a wall. You constantly search further and further, thinking you are going to get at something, but ultimately still you are beating your head against a wall. There is no answer to feeling search, no savior for it. That is why the Buddha Dharma is an atheistic teaching. We have to accept that ours is a lonely journey. Studying as a second skandha of feeling can be extremely important in helping us to realize that the whole journey is made alone, independent of anyone else. Still, we're trying to beat ourselves against something all the time. So to return to the mind-body development of feeling, the mind aspect of it provides tremendous resources for this delusive process. inexhaustible sources of dreaming and imagining. This extends to the situation of using drugs, such as LSD and others, which can produce all kinds of seemingly visionary and creative experiences. Experiences of perpetually unfolding of sight, smell, sound, beautiful like the continuous unfolding of a flower. All this can be produced. This kind of feeling on the mind level in ordinary situations and the drug experience and meditation provide all kinds of occasions for dwelling on spiritual materialism. Spiritual materialism means relating to experience in terms of its possible benefit to ego, which is the quality of all the skandhas. All the skandhas are what make up ego. So spiritual materialism tends to associate anything to do with spirituality, with a dream world or heaven, with something that has nothing to do with the body situation, with something that altogether bypasses the kitchen sink. Here I made the note, Hindu heaven. The Tibetan version of spiritual materialism is always what you would call Hindu heaven, like bliss, bliss, bliss. And everyone wants to, it's sort of like, it's Indian heaven because India is kind of a in-your-face, wretched, raw place. And everybody's trying to escape the immediate physical situation, including the Tibetans, actually, and get into some other kind of, dream space or psychological state. So Buddhism continually parodies that desire to create kind of an alternative reality with a religion or spiritual teaching. Interestingly enough, though, and that's only one form. Spiritual materialism is, say, one form of spiritual corruption. But we'll get back to that. Let's go on with Trungpa. The body aspect of feeling is associated with the actual relationship with things. So in contrast to trying to get away from the raw physical, we want to experience it. The body aspect of feeling is associated with the actual relationship with things. This element becomes much more vivid in the next skandha, perception, which we will discuss further on. The experience of actual things, thingness, of solidity and stability, as I've already said, this is not solidity and stability as it is, but it's our version of it. We think it is solid, we think it is a thing. Still, relating with this body aspect of feeling is spiritually very provocative and open. Suppose suddenly we get sick and feel pain in our body. The body is a thing made out of all kinds of things. Therefore, pain makes us feel a relationship with actual reality rather than imagining something beyond it. Of course, in this kind of situation, there's always the likelihood that somebody will come sit by our bed and read us prayers of how beautiful the beyond would be, and if we could only get out of the shameful, raw, physical situation. Talking about the beauties of heaven and spirituality, the person hopes to get us drunk on it and get our mind off the bodily situation of pain. But that does not work. Once we are into the world of imagination in which we can imagine how beautiful beyond the body could be, we are also connecting up with the imagination of how terrible the pain could become. We are lost in the world of wishful thinking or unwanted thoughts. Somehow relating directly with the body aspect of feeling goes much more in the direction of what is. Well, actually, at this point in time, nobody's going to sit by your bedside and talk to you about heaven. They're going to give you some opioids, and you're not going to feel much pain. In fact, you're going to like that experience so much, you're going to want to keep doing it. But hey, this is 1975, so we're not there yet. So that's just talk about feeling. I want to go back and sort of cover a few points here. So he begins by talking about how feeling, again, we're talking about the skandhas, and the skandhas are this structure of ego or our sense of self. That our sense of self is made up of these component parts, and that we're not really a solid persona, but we're a combination of dualistic ignorance, cheap emotion, cloudy perception, idiotic conceptions, and an overwhelming kind of soup of the present moment with all sorts of sensations bombarding us. So that is who we are in the relative sense, and that's covered by the 5 skandhas. So here he's talking about feeling, which he doesn't quite call it cheap emotion, but he gets pretty close to that. It's based on the ignorant dualism of form, of seeing things as solid and apart from us to begin with. And then we're going to build on that by, again, this what I call cheap emotion, in that we get, it's fake emotion. We get excited about some things, we dislike other things. You know, you got to think like teenage Hong Kong girls. I mean, you know, some things you go, ooh, they're very excited, other things like, you know, and just everything in the world is like divided up into cool or yucky. And we sort of keep that going all the time. So we get, you know, we want to roll with neat things in it, and we try to avoid roll with unpleasant things in it. And of course, it reaches its extreme, I think, in suburban living, which is, you know, upper class suburban living is all about that. Most of the rest of us actually have to live in a world where, you know, you see a lot of all sorts of stuff. He draws a distinction in terms of feeling and understanding. He wants us to understand how it's hooking up with our concepts. But concepts don't show up for a couple more skandhas. So he does kind of go ahead there and talk about how our meditation can be either just, you know, in our heads, discursive all the time, or we can actually have a meditation where we meditate on the body with various, you know, sensations and what we feel in the moment. And of course, then he goes on to say that meditating on the body is not discursive, but it's not actually a real body. It's just our own idea of the body, because again, we're all basically confused from the get-go. So we think it might be too hot or too cold, or we think we might be having this sensation or this pain, or so forth and so on. Then he hits on something that I find very interesting, although he takes it to a conclusion I disagree with. But he talks about the idea here with feeling that he's back to his basic model, which I think is brilliant. This idea of the loop, and that we're creating the world so that it reflects back on us. So when we get to feeling, now we've added this extra new layer of relationship, not just a matter of you know, a bunch of objects out there, but we have relationships with these objects, and the relationships are based on how we feel about them. Do we like them, or do we not like them? And then that leads us to, you know, rearranging them and relating to them in different kinds of ways. Are we welcoming and open, or are we closed and hostile? So we're always going back and forth. So, you know, somebody is nice to us, so we're very open. Somebody says something rude, so we're kind of closed. And everything is, again, we're trying to always gauge our reaction with respect to these other people who we've sort of established out there as having some sort of importance. And whether or not, however we spin the relational game, whether it's I'm nobody and you're somebody, or I'm somebody and you're nobody, however we spin that, it's all basically moot, because all we're doing is just keeping this projection wheel going. And so then he comes to the very radical idea that that it's stupid because it's all made up by ourselves. And we made up this whole relation game. And that's true. We have made that up. And our actual relationship is something different than our conceptual relationship with others or what we think about things. However, he then goes on to say that there's nobody else out there. There's no one that can help us. That's why Buddha Dharma is basically atheistic. That it's a completely lonely journey, and that that studying the second skandha of feeling can be extreme. This is the paragraph that goes off the rails. Suddenly, the second skandha of feeling can be extremely important in helping us to realize that the whole journey is made alone, independent of anyone else. Still, we are trying to beat ourselves against something all the time. I think it's a little extreme it's wrong actually to say the journey is made alone. That's a very jaded view of things. And it contradicts the Mahayana and Vajrayana teachings. I mean, there are bodhisattvas, there are Buddhas, there are protectors, there are dakinis. I mean, all of the ritual basis of Mahayana and Tibetan Buddhism is based on the idea of an interrelated cosmos where we're all in it together. Not only are we all in it together in a cosmic sense with invisible beings that we don't even know who they know, even though we're continually benefiting from their energies, we're also continually involved with each other's energies in good ways, in natural ways, in non-conceptual ways. I mean, we have a non-conceptual relationship with the world, a real relationship with the world beyond what we think about things. That's why you get such a crazy disconnect in this country, and that people have these views about things which are totally, off the wall, like most political views, particularly on the right side, are just bonkers. And yet, the people themselves, in their non-discursive life, are actually rather oftentimes quite human. And despite holding lunatic level views, and the rest of us who aren't absolute lunatics are, those of us who are, say, more open and liberal, are at least half mad, and that's a problem too. So I mean, it's just we only look good compared to the ones who are totally mad, that we're just half mad. So again, it's all interconnected, and so we're actually not alone. And in a way, if we were alone, that would be great. We would have no responsibility. Why would you even be on the path if you were alone? Who would care? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So I disagree on that point. But returning to the rest of it, now that's when he then goes into the idea of the spiritual materialism is kind of an extreme form of feeling. So if we really go into this second skandha, this idea of liking and disliking and making a big distinction between that, then we get into the complete trap of the Hindu heaven, where we want a paradise where everything is pleasing and blissful to us, and we want to get out of the trash world where everything is disagreeable. And so it's a very kind of suburban idea, except it's put on a metaphysical level. So, we want to, Indian Heaven is just a very nice suburb where everybody speaks Hindi. And then otherwise you're down in the black hole of Calcutta. So that's sort of an extreme example of pleasant versus unpleasant. But it's also pretty, at a pretty low level of religion or spirituality. I think the bigger problem in spiritual corruption isn't so much spiritual materialism. I don't think there's a real big problem with people wanting to be, have some heaven or look for some heaven. I don't really see that as a major problem in the world. The major problem is just the people self-serving themselves and using religion to do it, and any kind of official position or position of trust or position of responsibility people get, they try to milk it for all it's worth for their own benefit. Except in cases where you have some selfless individuals in roles of responsibility, which does happen. But there's certainly a lot of people who are milking their situations, whatever they are, for all they're worth. And when you get into the world of religion and spirituality, 9 people out of 10 are milking it for all it's worth. And some of these people are very famous and they write books and they're revered by lots of people and so forth and so on, but they're just essentially milking the situation. So that you have that kind of, and that's a rather difficult situation, both spiritually as it, when you have that much corruption going on, it's difficult for the truth to get a voice. Just like in American politics, it's, if you got billions of dollars spent lying, it's very often difficult for the true account of things to get much of a hearing because it can't shout as loud. I mean, that's the basic idea that the louder you shout, whoever can shout the loudest gets to call it truth. And that's sort of the same problem in religion, in spirituality, is the people who make a career out of it dominate the situation, and oftentimes in very unhelpful ways. And it's interesting that in those situations where there's corruption and self-serving, I mean, it falls into very predictable patterns. People are always trying to line their pockets, or they're trying to get an edge with the opposite sex, or they're trying to just get attention and feel important and get to mess with other people. And though, attention seeking, cash seeking, and sex seeking, that is, day in and day out, that's your basic problem with religion. But people can get into a spiritual position where they use spirituality as a way to escape the kind of direct aspects of their lives, the rawness of their life. I never found that worked, but presumably there are people that try and do that. Good luck. And that's the wrong approach to spirituality. You should look at what's going on in your life with more clarity, not try to escape it. That's the basic idea there. Well, that's my wild commentary on a wild talk. If you have any ideas or extra things to add.
I had a question. I do agree with your take on how he says that we're on our own, and we have nobody to help us. I do agree with your take, but do you think his point may have been, since we're talking about Abhidharma and all is mind, and that the mind is pretty much everything, and we're the only, I don't even know how to describe it, but we're the only entity who can influence our mind and how we see the world, that it's really up to us and no one else. Do you think he was maybe trying to make that point, but maybe in a kind of in a severe way?
Well, there is a certain truth to the idea of aloneness. And so we have to understand the way in which we're alone and the way in which we're not alone. From the point of view, and you're right again, from the point of view of the Abhidharma, or the early Buddhism, or the path of individual liberation, we all are sort of, always within our own minds. So in that sense, we're kind of, you never have my mind, I never have your mind. We always just have the mind that we have, and everything is seen through that. And of course, we have our own lengthy and historical individual conditioning, which makes us sort of unique in that way as well. And, the famous saying in Tibet is, you're born alone, you die alone. And you do see that when you see people dying. I mean, everybody, everybody's sort of together. There's a social nexus, but, when you leave it, then you leave it, and you leave it alone. You don't take people with you. That's considered rude. And improper behavior. But are we really alone? Or is this sort of a kind of heroic, romantic imagining? I think the individual path of liberation and this idea of the lonely journey that we do alone is a bit, my problem with it is its romantic quality. It sort of romanticizes the actual situation. The actual situation is more a case that we're all interrelated, as I said before. Not only that, but the visible is interrelated with the invisible. So there's all sorts of, even if no other human beings quite understand or could understand who we are, to the extent, we still have the benefit and support of invisible forces and energies. And that's been continuous since the very beginning. And in fact, the whole situation is, in a sense, as I've said, a conspiracy for our benefit. It's all to help us wake up. And continually, the blessings of the Buddhas permeate the whole universe in a way that we're always receiving invitations to wake up. Messengers are advising us, to wake up. When we slip off the path, messengers are arriving to inform us of that. Sometimes there's too many messengers. I find that a problem myself. I would personally not to have so many, but so in that sense, we're interrelated with that. And the invisible is interrelated with our whole visible world. It's not just a case of us in our own minds receiving these messages, but these messages are coming to us through the outer world. They're coming at us through the phenomenal. So when we say in Tantric or Dzogchen teaching that the guru is the phenomenal world, because of the benevolence of the Buddhas and our own teachers and so forth, all these positive forces, they're coming through the phenomenal world to us. So in that way, you can't say that we're separate from each other, because the Buddha nature in everybody is moving in connection with each other. And these forces are are, permeating everything and bringing in all the time, working through actual situations and events. So I think that my view is much more is not the romantic is a kind of, I think it's a young person's view. I had that kind of view when I was young. I had very romantic thoughts like that, but my worldview now is much more gratitude for all the blessings that we're continually receiving, that in fact that sustain the world. So in a world in which you're getting that's sustained by the blessings of the Buddhas, it's true there's not too much use for heroic individuals, but I'm okay with that.
I was going to ask, I think that related to your last question, but your answer went way beyond it. Before I ask, I'm just saying that the worldview of gratitude, but also that just the image of all the blessings and interpenetrating invisible forces, that's, I don't know.
Interpenetrating energies. That's the display of the phenomenal world. That's the display of the Buddhas. The Buddhas, it's the three levels of reality. I mean, the ultimate level, everything is just empty and clear light. And then there's the level of interlocked, interpenetrating energies, which is the radiance of the Sambhogakaya. And then there's the actual sensual, physical display in terms of, senses and events and experience. And all of that is always present each moment. So each moment has an empty, clear light, sparking and flashing interpenetrated energies, and a physical appearance, which takes karmic shapes. So that's the anatomy of a moment. And so, again, where is the aloneness in that? And there's no one's ever alone. Well, there's no one to be alone.
Well, and I was re-listening to last week's talk, and you were talking about the ground, not the light of vision, but the base, the ground of everything, and it's just this energetic thing. I don't know how do you say, potentiality energies, and they're all coming through us, and as we becoming one with our we're not thinking about our visions, we're just seeing. We're not thinking about feelings, we're just feeling. And that's like a complete picture. It just seems like it's just striking me right now. It's just an incredibly sane and functional approach to life. And like I feel like the modern alternative to that is so dry and lacks all richness, and also has the unfortunate quality of being, an extreme of stoicism or something. I don't know. Whereas this is kind of, you're buoyed, there's enrichment within you and all around you. It's hopeful.
Well, the opposite view to the world view of gratitude, which I think is really kind of the culminating worldview. The alternative to that, the opposite of that, is sort of your exploitative, everybody's in it for themselves, we're all thieves, worldview that permeates, the media and depiction of current events. That you see quite a bit of that kind of thing. That people are valued for their productive capabilities, and what's in it for me. The whole world of quid pro quo. Well, you want something from me. What are you going to give me? What's gratitude is there in that view? There's no gratitude. It's always, that's the world of we're all out for ourselves, and make sure I screw you before you screw me. And the guy who comes out on top is the guy who can bully everyone else the best. That's a very ugly worldview, and it's been way over amplified, and to just be noted and dismissed. And then people are doing better that way.
Well,
they're not good.
It was not Aldous Huxley, the other Huxley, Thomas Huxley or something, had picked through Darwin's Origin or whatever Species book, and he had kind of ignored all the references to cooperation and interpenetration, and had picked out survival as the fittest as the most salient term in there, where actually it doesn't show up nearly as much, like just a small fraction compared to things like cooperation and like you were talking about with the trees earlier, how they just all sending each other signals and nutrients and all that. So.
Well, survival of the fittest is a sort of it's a tautology. It doesn't say anything. Obviously, the fittest survive because they in fact survived. Yeah. If you don't survive, you're not very fit by definition. So that part of it is not as and also when it's talking about the natural world and how the natural world, strives to kind of, keep itself healthy in different ways. And part of that is a cooperative thing. Part of it is its ability to regenerate. Part of it is a kind of gardening almost. It kind of weeds out the weaker members, or the weaker members are weeded out. So there's a kind of, all that's part of the natural world. And human society, in some ways, benefits from adopting some of what it learns from nature. But in other ways, we're a little higher up than that. And when you apply survival of the fittest, which is a natural concept, to a social context, the social Darwinism, and as which is sort of the philosophy of the Republican Party. So it's been claimed.
Well, I had one other question, and then I'll stop. But it was related to what Phil had asked. Just in the beginning tonight, you had mentioned the distinction between actual relationships and conceptual relationships, and I'm just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit more. That seems because it can.
Well, when we relate to people, human to human, in a kind of open space in which there's no judgment, where the projection mechanism is turned off. We're just there, and we accept them as being there. That's the kind of human to human relationship. Now, if we relate to them in terms of categories, or in any other kind of labeling that we apply to someone, of any kind of conceptual tag that we put on this person, is really going to get in the way of that open sort of relationship. So yeah, I mean, I play ping pong with some guys, and several of them wearing Trump hats. Well, to me, it's. But I don't. When I'm playing with them and I'm there with them in that space, they could wear a Toll of the Hun hat. It doesn't make any difference. It's not stuff. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to get into the trap of categorizing, because that's just, unless everybody wants to get into that kind of mode, even, push your buttons that way. And sure. So that's a bit of an open relationship. It's just that you're relating to people without any conceptual stuff in between.
So I was going to ask, like, do you think? I mean, obviously, social media is almost totally conceptual, but also even just email and text. Those are, I don't know that those things help us so much, because it's just an exchange of concepts without any.
Well, I think we have to kind of get off. I think if you're going to live in the real world as practitioners, you don't want to spend much, if any, time at all on social media, and we should try and break our news habit too. Although those are hard things to do, but you need to read enough to keep informed. At the same time, you're when constantly getting sucked into useless information. So I'm not so sure. I don't think sometimes once you get a take on a situation, then you don't actually have to study it anymore. We used to call this the focus group principle. That in research, in market research, when the company wants to figure out what to do, or what do customers think about something, we get a group of them together and they talk about it. And so we get about 12 people together, they talk about something. And then we get another group of 12 different people together, and another group of 12 different people. Well, after about, some number of these focus groups, and quite often it might be 3 or 4, it might be 5 or 6, it gets to be where you hear the same things all the time. And then you understand the situation, how it's being perceived. It's different than a survey, because you're not doing anything statistical, but you're just by talking to enough people, you get a sense of what the pattern is. And once you get the pattern, then you don't have to do any more focus groups. So you stop doing them at that point, because you've learned what you need to learn. And I think that a lot of times, in terms of keeping ourselves informed about things in the world, once we see the pattern, we don't have to continually refresh the details. The media feels that it has to refresh the details all the time, So, but I think once you get the idea that what's going on, and you can just look at the highlights.
Does it make it difficult, though, when there's a lot of misinformation out there? So not singling out one side over the other, but, just saying that so I kind of had an experience this week, which kind of surprised me. I have a friend at work who he's actually the health coach at work, and we were friends for a while and had a lot of things in common, but we were talking this week about something, and he came out and he completely said something that kind of bowled me over, because it was completely against what I guess I thought his views were, and that he's a climate change denier, which doesn't match up with a lot of his other views on things. So I was kind of like just taken aback. But when I asked him about it, I was like, did I hear you right? Did you just say that? And he kind of just, came out with told me a bunch of stuff, a lot of it which was just patently false, but obviously somebody's spewing this information out there somewhere. Um, I don't know. It just seems weird because there's just so much misinformation that you have to combat. Like it almost seems like you're always retreating back to the same points or finding new information or new ways to combat misinformation or talking points from the other side of issue.
Well, yeah, the situation is, from the point of view of rhetoric and public discourse, is atrocious at the moment because people figured out that they can manipulate rhetoric with, oodles of dough. And again, it's this idea of amplifying things. And so they amplify things so much, and they understand how they have a lot of money, so they have trained psychologists and people understand how the mind works, but the people that are willing to do evil things for money figure out models for them, and yeah, these people get totally manipulated, and they understand how perceptions, how concepts are formed. They study this stuff. I studied that stuff. I know how you can manipulate people, but it's wrong. Yeah, you may know how to kill people too, but if you don't go out and kill people, you don't know how you might do it. So yeah, that's a big problem. And so yeah, it reminds me though of this. The Tibetans used to have this story they would tell that was very down to earth, and basically it was somebody comes and they have a big stick and they beat you with the big stick, and should you get angry at the stick because it's just getting used? It's just picked up by the guy who's beating with you. So getting mad at the stick is sort of stupid. So getting mad at your friend is like getting mad at the stick. It's just a tool.
Well, don't they take?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, yeah. I also went down another rabbit hole with him. So I guess he's really interested in alternative health and and some of that stuff is really interesting. I do feel like the medical establishment is very dogmatic on certain things, and there's more wiggle room than they want to make it out to seem like. But what I was really surprised to find out, I found it out this week, kind of after he revealed his stances on certain things, that the alternative medicine community is largely right wing and pretty far right wing, which just seems kind of contradicting to me because it seems that it would be more of a hippie thing, more of a natural healing kind of stuff. That it would be more
The
of
right wing, no, that's a really interesting point. The right wing of today is not your father's right wing.
No.
I mean, for one thing, they're into alternative medicine, conspiracy theories, right-wing politics, marijuana, because somebody's voting this legal stuff in there, and it's not hippies. There aren't any there.
Right.
They're a real interesting mix of they're very modern.
Yeah. Weird.
But fascism. That's actually in Germany. Fascist parties had all sorts of. If you go back and study even the circle around Hitler, which was the hardcore, but they were all into alternative health things. That was a bit in the occult. and all kind. I mean, there's a lot of times right wing politics are mixed up with a whole sort of other kinds of things. Most of the people who are cultive also are right wingers. A lot of the early people who studied Tibetan Buddhas were pretty far right wingers. That the Nazis had a big interest in Tibetan Buddhism. So yeah, and I don't know what it is. It's something about. I've always wondered about those kind of connections. Is it something about power that you get interested in, both in worldly power and unworldly power? You know,
like the black magic aspect of it, or something.
Yeah. Or the whacked mind is home for all sorts of, a disturbed mind. It's like disturbed soil, all kinds of weeds and noxious plants grow in it.
Disruptive action. Power play.
Take us back to that earlier. Go ahead. The earlier view of the interpenetrating energies. I want to think about that.
Well, that's the opposite of what we've just been talking about. Is cooperation, appreciation, unity, togetherness, wholeness, and so that, aligning ourselves with that is generally that's being one with the Tao, is the tuning into our Buddha nature. So that's what you have to say to your friend. You have to say, give up all the crackpot stuff. You can come to the Buddha. Buddha can save you from this, idiocy.
I believe that Darwin did misquoted him when he said survival of the fittest to Darwin. And I read and heard that he actually said survival of the most adaptable. And then it got, changed. I think that's noteworthy.
Well, yeah, that makes a little sense. I mean, what would the fittest be for Darwinian? It would be the most adaptable. The adaptable species survive. The ones who can adapt from dinosaurs. So that's what we witnessed this week, the death throes of dinosaur republicans.
One can only hope.
Well, we've run past our time here, and let's see. Next week, I will be gone, so we will not meet next week. Flying back. I said, what next week is? Yeah, I'll be in Colorado next week. Next week is Halloween. I'll be going trick or treating with my grandchildren. At this point. But I will see you in 2 weeks, and we'll put an announcement then. And thank you all. Hey, Barrett. By this, Barrett, we all the storm is raging, all day, sickness and death. May I pray.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Good
it.
night.
See you. Bye.